major and perfect intervals. Welcome to lesson 1 of the 6-part lesson series, Intervals in Music. In today's lesson, we are going to cover the basics. What is an interval? How do I deal with it? We're going to talk about major intervals, perfect intervals. We're also going to get you playing them today by showing you patterns on the bass and guitar fretboards. What is an interval? What is this crazy term I've been hearing so much about in music? An interval is simply the distance between two notes. That's it. Just like an interval in time, an interval in music is the distance between note 1 and note 2, any two given notes. So we can see this really clearly on the piano. Piano is a very linear instrument. So if I take, I don't know, a C, and I take another note, say an F, just two completely random notes, there's a distance between those. And we measure these distances in the simplest form in half steps. Now, a half step is just the distance from one note to the very next note. On the guitar or the bass, it's one fret to the next. On the piano, it's one key to the next. So doesn't matter, white key or black key, wherever I start, I'm starting on a D here. And if I go to the next note, that's a half step. I go to the next note, that's a half step. Next note is a half step. So when I move to the right on the keyboard, as soon as I bump into a new key, that's a half step. So that is a distance. That's an interval in and of itself. Obviously, two half steps make a whole step. So if I was to take C again and I move up not one half step, but two half steps, that's a whole step. So those are a couple of smaller units, smaller intervals that we can use to think about distances between notes. Okay, here we have a representation of the major scale. We're not going to worry about what exactly the major scale is right now. Let's just think of it as a series of whole steps and half steps. It's a series of notes, and we're going to give those notes numbers. The first note in the major scale is number 1. The second note is number 2, etc. These are called scale degrees. If you need to review scale degrees and what those are, make sure and check out my lesson on scale degrees. And by the way, all the documents that I show you today will be available in the description, so make sure and look for those if you want to download them. So like I said, we have the major scale here, a series of whole steps and half steps. And this is going to help us give more meaning to our intervals. So far, you and I have looked at measuring intervals, the distance between two notes, in whole steps and half steps. Well, those are small chunks. That's like measuring how far it is from here to the store in centimeters. Well, it's possibly not a very meaningful measurement. So we're going to use the major scale to give these intervals more meaning, to be able to look at larger intervals, larger chunks. Here's how we break up those chunks. We look at the distance. Now, intervals are always measured from 1. So if I've got the distance between two notes I'm measuring, I choose the lower note as number 1, and then the higher note is wherever it lands. So let's say that I have a note that is a half step away. Well, that would land right here. And let's say I have a note that is 2 whole steps away. That would land right here. And so we use this as our sort of yardstick to have a standard unit of measurement in order to measure the distance between the notes. Now, the major scale is going to be everything. It's everything when we are looking to name and study and understand intervals. So if you need to review your major scale, be sure to check out one of my videos on that. Now let's get into the names. What do we call these intervals? Let's take a look at the major scale one more time. And what we're going to do is we're going to use these numbers given in the major scale, these scale degrees. We are going to use those as our standard of measurement. So if I have a note, two notes that are a whole step apart, let's say we had a C on the piano earlier, and if we went up by 2 notes, we would have a D there. Well, we know that as a whole step. We can also call that a second, because from 1 to 2 is a second. That's just what we call it. I don't know. If I have an E here, that's 2 more notes on the piano or on your fretboard. And we can say, well, from C to E, that's a what? What do you want to call that? Yeah, let's call it a third. So the distance from 1 to any other note in the major scale is named after that number. And we call it a fourth, a fifth, a sixth, a seventh. When we get to 8, we actually call that an octave. That's our first fancy name. I started fancy names early. But number 8, we don't call that an eighth. That would sound strange, and we wouldn't know that would sound strange unless we were involved in the musical tradition. So I am here to tell you, don't say eighth. It's going to sound weird. Say octave. When you go from 1 to 8, that's an octave. And incidentally, that's the same note as 1. If it's not the same note as 1, it's not an octave. One more fancy name I want to give you before we move on. This is hardly ever used, but I'm just going to go ahead and give it to you so that we've got it out of the way. 1. What if you've got a C on the piano and someone else on some different piano plays the exact same note? We're going to call that a unison. There. Now you know what you call the distance between two notes that have no distance between them. I mean, like in math, we call it 0, right? Or in measurement, we call it 0. That is 0 units away. Well, in music, we call it a unison. Today, we are only going to deal with intervals that are pulled from the major scale. In other words, we're not going to learn what the distance from 1 to between 2 and 3 is. That's going to be in lessons 2 and 3 of this series. So those are the simple names, the informal names, if you will. If someone says, play a second, or play a third, or play a fourth, we know what that means. We pull those numbers from the major scale. There are, however, more formal names that we can use for these same intervals. So if you watch the introduction to this series, you know I talked about terminology a little bit and how it's going to get a little crazy, a little weird, a little strange. Not everything's going to make sense all the time, and so we're going to enter into part 1 of that, and these are just the rules. I didn't make the rules, but I can teach them to you so that you can understand them. Guaranteed. Okay, let's look again at the major scale. So we talked about from 1 to 2. That's a second, right? Well, the title of this document is actually Intervals Major and Perfect. So some of these numbers, seconds, thirds, fourths, we're actually going to give their full name, their fancy name of major or perfect. And some of them get major, some of them get perfect, and we get to learn which ones get which. So when I zoom back a little bit and look at this entire sheet, I see that we have color-coded as well. Very, very fancy. I see that we have the full names to these intervals. And here's the rule. Fourths, fifths, and eighths, remember, don't say eight, say octave. Fourths, fifths, and octaves, if they're from the major scale, if they are the distances shown here, they are called perfect. It's just a term. That's just what they're called. So don't look into any deeper meaning. There's historical meaning to that. We really don't care. They sound really nice. That's why they're called perfect. Okay? Good enough. So if you have a fourth and someone says, well, hey, what kind of fourth do you have? And you want to give more meaning, be very specific about what kind of fourth, because in future lessons, we're going to have more than one kind of fourth just to prepare you. You're going to say it's a perfect fourth or a perfect fifth. And so if I'm playing a C here and the fourth of C happens to be F, and someone says, hey, play that a fourth up, or play the fourth of C. They could also say, hey, play the perfect fourth. And there would be no difference in their language. So you can call someone by their first name. You can call someone by their first and last name. It's the same person. It's the same interval. So the informal way is we call it a fourth, and the more complete way that we could name it is called a perfect fourth or a perfect fifth, a perfect octave. So fourths, fifths, and octaves are perfect. Now, no one's perfect, but we're just going to call them perfect just to give them a name. Okay, everything else is called major. So if I go from 1 to 2, I have a major second. And you know what? You're so smart, you probably already looked down and you probably already saw that. Major second, major third, right? We see these distances here, and then it's brought down, and we say, oh, that is the distance of a major third. That's how big a major third is. We have the perfect fourth, perfect fifth, and on down. And again, this document is available in the description for you to download. So I highly recommend that you do that. Download it, print it out, put it on a screen wherever you practice your music, wherever your learning environment is. Put this thing up. Start memorizing these intervals. Start giving these distances between notes more meaning. Before we move on to our fretboard patterns, which is where the rubber meets the road, so to speak, I want to review these rules just to make sure that we've got them. Again, this document is in your description. Available for download. No extra charge. Isn't that cool? Okay. So the intervals from scale degrees 2 through 7 in the major scale can be referred to by their number. In other words, a distance from this note to this note can be called a second. Distance from this note way over here, that's 2 whole steps and a half step. However far that is, whatever notes we're talking about, that known distance, that yardstick, can be called a fourth. So second, third, fourth, fifth, sixth, and seventh. Don't say eighth. Remember that. The intervals from scale degrees 2, 3, 6, and 7 are formally known as major. Okay, if I want to be more complete in my description, I can call it a major second. Or if someone says a major second to me, I don't have to be thrown off and say, what are you talking about? What is a major second? It's just a second, and it can be called a second or a major second. 4, 5, and 8 are formally known as perfect. Those are the rules. Those are your major and perfect intervals. Now let's get into the fretboard. Okay, patterns. This is where we take our knowledge of intervals, which until now could be applied to any instrument, and we bring them to the fretboard for the guitar and for the bass. So the patterns are the same on guitar and on the bass. Doesn't matter what instrument you're playing. Guitar players, if you cross the B string, these patterns change. So if you need help on the B string, look for one of my videos on that. I have a 6-string bass here today. Again, it does not matter how many strings you have or what instrument you're playing. So I'm going to go ahead and show you these patterns on this just to start off. I'm going to start off on A for all of these just to give it a note. So if you're playing along at home, I'm on the 5th fret of your low E string. So let's look at the pattern and how this looks. Now I have the major scale posted all over this document. Again, this is in the description for your downloading convenience. But I have the major scale all over the place here because I want to have it easy to compare to what we have. Here's a 1 in the major scale, and if you're unfamiliar, this is the major scale pattern on the bass or on the guitar. If I'm at 1, there's my 1. And if I play the second note in the major scale, well, that sort of forms a pattern, doesn't it? And then we can see that pulled out of the major scale. And now this exists in its own right. This doesn't have to be part of a major scale. This is just a major second, or less formally, a second. So if I'm playing this note, A, 5th fret on my low E string, and I move up to where this pattern shows me, right? I'm moving it up 2 frets on the same string. That's a major second. That's that distance. That's a known distance. That is your yardstick for a major second. Works with all the other intervals, just exactly the same. Here I see, here's the distance between 1 and 3, right? It's how would you describe that? Maybe it's like 1 string up and then 1 fret back. We could describe it like that. Some people say they look like X's or L's or whatever. You can think about this pattern any way you want to, but the fact remains, if I'm on this note is a third. Again, I'm on any note on any string, in this case A. I'm going to move up by 1 string and then back by 1 fret. That is a third. And you can see how my fingers are making the same pattern as my major third there. It's exactly the same thing. 4th is the same way. So here we have our 4th, and we're gonna play, I'm gonna bar this. That's getting into technique, but I could use 2 fingers as well if I want to. So if this is 1, this is 4. All the time, every day of the week, even on Tuesdays. It's so great to have rules that don't change just once in a while. So there's my 1, there is my 5. That's a perfect 5th there. So again, if I play the major scale, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, I've got a bunch of notes in between there, but once I found my 5th, that becomes a distance all by itself. That is the interval of a 5th. I can go to 6. I'm going to go, it's kind of like where my 3rd was. My 3rd was 1 string up and 1 fret back. I'm going to go 2 strings up and 1 fret back. So there's my 6ths, my major 6ths, if I want to be really fancy about it. Here's my major 7th. So a little bit hard to see with the fingering there, but it's 2 strings up and then 1 fret up. And then my octave. I've got that right here as well. So can't see the octave right now. Let me get that out of the way for you. There's the octave. And then at the bottom, I have a reminder of the rules. Get myself out of the way here. There we go. Here's our rules. I'm not going to read these to you again because that would be demeaning. I think you're perfectly capable of reading these on your own, but we went over them earlier. The rules are there. In fact, the rules are for what we went over today are going to be on every single sheet that I made available for you to download. So I don't want to hear any excuses about how you don't know the rules, because they're on all the pages. Just read them, memorize them. It works the same on the guitar. Same patterns, same intervals. I've got here my guitar, which matches my shirt almost today. Again, we're trying to be very, very fancy today, trying to coordinate everything. From 1 to 2 is a second. From 1 to 3 is a third. 1 to 4 is a fourth. 1 to 5 is a fifth. 1 to 6 is a sixth. 1 to 7 is a seventh. 1 to 8, not an eighth. We're going to call it an octave. Major second, major third, perfect fourth, perfect fifth, major second, major seventh, perfect octave. Now, we're not learning all of this just because it's fun. We're learning it because it makes us prepared really to study music theory. Makes us prepared to look at music in a different way, to have quantifiable measurements for known results. So as you're playing your instrument, as you're studying music, keep this in mind. Look for these intervals. Where are they? Let's just do a real simple melody here on the guitar. And let's say that I came up with, again, starting on A. And let's say I go... What did I just do? That sounded so cool. I thought it sounded cool. What was that? I want to remember that. I want to be able to play that again later and give it more meaning and talk about it with some other musician and figure out more parts for it, right? So I've got a 1 here. I'm deciding that note is 1, and I'm going to the 6. Now that distance, that interval of a major 6 is going to sound like that every single time. So if I know what a 6 pattern is, and I also know what the sound is, I'm going to know what it sounds like before I play it. And on the other side of the coin, if I don't know what it sounds like, but I play it and it sounds cool, and I go, well, what was that? Oh, that was a major 6. Oh, great. So my melody I came up with was 1 to 6. Now, what is that? Oh, what is that note there? What is that? Let's see. If I'm on 1, I'm still going to think of this as my 1, and I'll measure my intervals from there. Well, that's a 5. Okay, so my melody, really, the theme of my melody is 1 to 6, down to 5. And since I know what my intervals are, I have names for them, now I can give more meaning to what I'm playing. I can remember it better, and I can give it names, which is actually very helpful. Your homework, should you choose to accept it, is to learn these intervals. Learn the names, learn the silly rules, 4, 5, and 8. 8, octave, 4th, 5ths, and octaves. They're perfect. Everything else is major. 2s, 3s, 6s, 7s, those are major. Pretty simple rules. They don't make like a lot of sense, but there they are. So learn the rules, learn what the names of the notes are, and learn them on your fretboard. Use this as a warm-up before you've started playing a lot in the day. You always want to get physically warm around the instrument. You want to ease into it. So use that time to be slowed down by your brain, because your brain is learning these things, and enjoy your time with the instrument. Play these intervals as your warm-up. So I'm going to do that for you on the guitar. I'm going to show you that I'm going to play from 1 to 2. I'm going to say major second. Then I'm going to play from 1 to 3. I'm going to call that a major third. 1 to 4, well, that's a perfect fourth. 1 to 5, that's a perfect fifth. 1 to 6 is a major 6. Come on, you got the next one. Major 7 and perfect octave. That's it. That's it. So go ahead and play through those. Don't always start on A. Vary where you're starting. Always switch it up on yourself. Play them backwards. Play from 1 to 8 to 7 to 6, right? Don't always play it in the same exact way. Keep switching it up on yourself, and that's how you're going to make you stronger on the instrument and make you more confident with your intervals. I really appreciate you being here today. I appreciate your support. I love doing these videos. If you love watching them, please support me as I'm supporting you in your musical efforts. What you can do is easy. You can subscribe to my channel. You can like this video, and you can make some comments. In lesson 2 of this series, we're going to start making changes to the intervals that we learned today. We're going to take the major intervals specifically, and we're going to adjust those to make them minor intervals. Very, very dark and mysterious. I'm looking forward to it. Can't wait. And I will see you in the next lesson. My name is Alex, and here's where you can find me.